My 9-year-old granddaughter whispered to me, "Grandpa, your parents are comin' to take your place tonight," and those words hit me like a sledgehammer. They came out of nowhere, smashing the peace I'd worked so hard to build for years. I'm a grandpa who's always given them everything, my cash, my home, my heart. But right then, I just stood there, my face like stone, hidin' the shock the same way I did at Ingrid's funeral. What I did next, though, would turn their little plan into a trap they'd never see coming. I was gonna beat them at their own game, and they'd remember it forever. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and let me know where you're watching from. That little girl's warning was sharp, but the whole thing had started a few hours earlier. "Dad, you gotta listen to me." That was Hans' voice on the phone, crackin' as it cut through the hum of my kettle and the steady sound of the ocean outside. It was just after 8 a.m., and Hans never called this early unless something was seriously wrong. His voice was shaken in a way I hadn't heard since he was 18 and put a basketball-sized dent in my pickup. "What's goin' on, son?" I asked, leaning back in my kitchen chair. I watched the steam curl up from my mug while the morning sun painted long, bright lines across my oak table. "Greta and I have been talking," he said. "We think it's really important that you get to Elsa's birthday party a bit early today." The words came out too fast, like he'd rehearsed them. "Early? I've never missed one of her birthdays," I shot back. There was a pause, and I could just barely hear a low voice in the background. It was Greta, sharp and pushy. Hans's tone changed. "She just wants to make sure you're there. The party starts at 4, but maybe come around 3:30. We've got some family stuff to talk over." My hand tightened around the mug. Family stuff wasn't a phrase Hans ever used, especially not in the 4 years since Ingrid passed. What kind of family stuff could it be? I kept my voice easy, but my stomach felt like it was full of ice. "Just planning for the future, making sure everyone's taken care of," he said. I'd heard that line 100 times in boardrooms and backroom deals. When folks say everyone, they usually mean themselves first. "Still," I said, "sure, I'll be there early. Wouldn't miss it." I hung up, but the uneasy feeling stayed right there with me. A few hours later, Elsa found me on the porch. Her little hand grabbed my sleeve, and she looked all around before she leaned in to whisper her secret. In her voice, I could hear fear mixed with a kind of courage a kid shouldn't have to carry. "I heard them last night," she said, her words quick and low. "They were in the kitchen. Mom said, you're too old to live here by yourself. And Dad said something about papers from the bank. She told me her mom said it would be too late for me to do anything about it." My jaw got tight, but I kept my voice steady. "Did you hear anything else?" Elsa nodded, bit in her lip. "Dad said, what if he finds out? And Mom said, by then, it'll be done." I knelt down so we were eye to eye. "You did the right thing telling me, but for now, this is our little secret, okay?" She hesitated. "Will you still love me if they get mad?" My heart ached, but my answer was solid. "Nothing they do could ever change how much I love you." She gave a small nod, but I could feel the worry weighing her down. I told her to go help Greta with the party, putting on a smile to hide our talk. From the porch, I watched Hans laughing with the neighbors, big and full of energy, the perfect host. Greta stood next to him, her hand barely touching his arm, her eyes sizing up the place like a realtor looking at a new listing. They had no idea their plan was already starting to fall apart. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the ocean was calm out past the dunes, but my mind was already moving, planning, and making a list. Ingrid's voice came back to me. "Klaus, don't let being proud make you reckless, but don't let being scared make you small." She'd known Hans's weaknesses. A couple of years back, she'd warned me to watch out for him when someone else was doing his talking. Back then, I thought she meant his college buddies. Now, I saw she meant Greta. I walked inside and put the kettle on, more for the noise than for any tea. I opened the drawer where I keep my legal pads, the yellow ones I've used for every house design, every budget, every serious plan in my life. I wrote the date, then 3 words, papers from bank. Greta's time in banking wasn't long, but it was enough to know how to wrap something dangerous in a package that looked like help. In my years running my own firm, I'd dealt with power of attorney forms, conservatorship petitions, and the slow, suffocating processes that can strip a man of his stuff and his freedom without him even knowing the rope is getting tighter. If they wanted to play a game of legal chess, they were about to find out I've been a builder my whole life, and I know how to reinforce a foundation before a storm hits. The rest of the morning went by in the usual pre-party rush, with the smell of icing and coffee and the quiet rustle of gift wrap. My neighbor, Heidi Mueller, a retired bank teller, stopped by with a dish for the party. She said hello in her usual friendly way, then, in a quiet voice, told me she'd seen Hans and Greta downtown a few days ago, coming out of the bank with a big stack of papers. Looked official, she said. And they seemed to be in a big hurry. I thanked her, put that information right next to Elsa's warning, and felt the puzzle pieces click into place. By 1 o'clock, I was dressed and ready. The gifts for Elsa, an art set and a book about birds, were piled by the front door. I got to Hans's house right at 3:30. Greta greeted me with a smile that was a little too bright, her hand on my arm just a second too long. "Klaus, so glad you're here. You look great." Hans showed up, clapping me on the shoulder. "Dad, perfect timing. Let's get you comfortable, then we can talk before people show up." But before we could talk, Elsa came running over, her smile real and honest. She gave me a big hug. I handed her the wrapped art set, and for a second, everything felt normal. Then I saw Greta watching us, her eyes getting sharp for just a moment before she turned to say hello to someone else. Inside, the living room was decked out with streamers and balloons, the kind of fancy setup Greta never bothered with for family stuff. Guests started coming in, and laughter filled the room. But under it all, I could feel the plan. Greta and Hans were moving together, cutting off certain talks, leading me towards certain people. I played my part, smiling, making small talk, but noticing every look they gave each other. As the afternoon went on, the crowd thinned out. Around 5 o'clock, Hans caught my eye. "Dad, why don't you stick around for a little bit after? We can go over that family stuff we talked about." Greta jumped in, her voice smooth. "It'll only take a little while. We've been working on something that will make things a lot easier for you." I gave a small nod, hiding the fact that by then, my own plan was already coming together, one that would need good timing, witnesses, and the kind of exactness I'd spent a lifetime perfecting. They thought tonight would be the night they took over. They didn't get that it would be the night I started talking it all back. By the time the last of Elsa's friends were picked up and the paper plates were in the trash, the light outside had turned the color of coolant ashes. The party noise was gone, and it was just Hans, Greta, and me in the living room. I knew this was the moment they'd been setting up all afternoon. Hans looked toward the door, like he was checking, to make sure no one else would come in, then leaned against the sofa arm. "Dad," he said, his voice a little softer than usual. "Why don't we sit down for a minute? Just us." Greta was already heading for the dining table, the only place in their house with no view of the ocean. No distractions, just a flat surface and plenty of room for papers. I followed her, taking my time, my face just as calm as it had been all day. Inside, my mind was going over angles, distances, and the small bulge in Greta's leather bag sitting by her chair. She sat across from me, her back straight but relaxed, the way a banker is when she's about to close a deal she knows she's already won. "We've been thinking about the future," she started, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "About making sure you don't have to worry about the little things, bills, errands, bank visits. Hans slid into the chair next to her, nodding along. It's about helping you, Dad. We want to take some of that weight off your shoulders. I let my eyes drop to her bag. Greta noticed, and without missing a beat, she unzipped it and pulled out a slim, tan folder. My gut knew the feel of it before my brain did: heavy paper, the kind law offices use to make things feel permanent. She put it on the table between us, turning it so it faced me. The top page had a yellow sticky note on the line where you sign. In big letters, the header said, "Durable Power of Attorney." Hans smiled like he was giving me a gift. "This just means we can handle things for you if something comes up. You'd still be in control. This is just a backup." That word, "just," is one I've heard in too many business talks. It's the sugar they put on the hook. Greta reached into the folder again and pulled out a second paper. The name on this one made my chest feel tight: "Transfer on Death Deed." "It's a precaution," she said lightly, like we were talking about buying a spare umbrella. "If something happens, the place goes straight to the family without probate. It's seamless. You'd still live here as long as you want." My fingers rested on the edge of the paper, tracing the watermark without looking down. "And you filled these out yourselves?" "Just the basics," Greta said. "Names, addresses. All that's missing is your signature and a notary stamp. We can get the stamp tomorrow morning." Hans jumped in, his tone too quick. "It's better to do it now, Dad. Tomorrow's Sunday, the banks are closed. We can get it all done and over with." I looked at his face. The eagerness there wasn't about helping me. It was about locking something in before the weekend was over. "What brought this on so fast?" I asked, keeping my voice curious, not mad. Hans shifted in his chair. "We've been talking about it for a few months," he said, looking at Greta. "With the storms last winter and all the repairs. You've got a lot to handle at your place. We just think it's time." Greta leaned in, lowering her voice like she was telling me a secret. "We saw what happened to Frau Brandt down the street when she had that fall. No paperwork, and her kids had to fight the bank just to get access to her money to pay her bills. We don't want that for you." It was a good story, made sense, and sounded like she cared. But I'd lived in the neighborhood long enough to know Frau Brandt's fall was down 3 steps from her porch and right into her own lawyer's driveway. She'd handled her business just fine. "I appreciate your concern," I said, and I meant it in the smallest possible way. Greta slid a pen across the table, the kind that leaves thick, strong lines. "If we do this now, we can save you some headaches later." Out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement in the hall. Elsa was peeking in, her hand holding the door frame. Our eyes met for just a second, and I gave the smallest nod. She stayed right there, listening. I picked up the pen, rolling it between my fingers. "You've already talked to someone at the bank?" Hans nodded. "We've got the account set up for joint access once this is signed. Makes it easier for us to pay things for you." That was the tip-off. Joint access was the first step to mix in the money, and mix in the money was the first step to emptying it out. "And the house?" I asked. Greta didn't even blink. "The deed would just make it simpler to transfer things if it was ever needed. You'd be listed as the life tenant, you keep living there until." She trailed off just long enough for the silence to say what she wouldn't. "Until you decide otherwise," Hans finished, way too fast. The speed of their pitch was getting faster. They wanted me to go from questions to sign in, without enough time to think, which told me they were worried I might actually start thinking. I put the pen down. "I don't sign anything without reading every single line." Greta smiled, but her eyes didn't. "Of course, take your time." She pushed the folder a few inches closer. I opened it, looking over the text real slow. It was all there, the big picture language about actin in my best interest, the parts that let them sell the property, and no need for me to approve any transactions under a certain amount. And in the deed, the quiet part that let them refinance to keep its value without my okay. This is thorough, I said. We wanted to cover all our bases, Hans replied. We're just looking out for you. I closed the folder gently. Then you won't mind if I have Heidi take a look at it? She knows more about these things than I do. Greta's smile got tight. That's not necessary. We already had someone review it. Then it should hold up to a second opinion, I said, my voice even. Hans's jaw shifted just enough to show the first crack in his confidence. Dad, we're just trying to help. And I'm trying to make sure we all sleep well tonight, I replied. The air in the room had changed. Greta reached for the pen again, but I slid it back toward her. Tomorrow, I said. 7 a.m. With witnesses. For a minute, nobody said a thing. Then Greta leaned back, faking being at ease. All right, tomorrow. Hans forced a smile, but his eyes were somewhere else, figuring out what this delay might cost him. I stood up, letting the chair legs scrape on the floor just enough to signal the end of the talk. I'll see myself out, I said and walked toward the door. As I passed the hall, Elsa slipped her hand into mine for just a second. You okay? She whispered. Better than they think, I whispered back. Outside, the evening air smelled of salt and pine again, but now it carried the weight of what had just been set in motion. They thought they had almost won. They didn't get that they had just given me everything I needed to tear their plan to pieces on my own terms. I left Hans's house with the weight of the folder still in my hands, light as paper, heavy as their intentions. The road home followed the dark line where the ocean holds its own secrets. By the time my porch light came into view, the night had gotten quiet, but not silent. It was that low, steady breath our coast knows, the one that makes a man hear his own footsteps. I unlocked the door, set the folder on the oak table, and turned on the kitchen lamp. The warm light made the papers look normal again, as if a signature could ever be a simple thing. Some nights you sleep, and some nights you build. Tonight, I was buildin'. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the drawer, wrote the time at the top, 9:45, and started a list with the calm of a man measuring rafters. Witnesses. Lawyer. Proof of a pattern. Layout of the room. My voice. Don't raise it, use it. I took out my phone and typed slowly so there wouldn't be any mistakes. To Heidi, need you here tomorrow at 7 a.m., with your niece, the one with the notary stamp. It's a serious matter. Please reply yes if you can. To Fritz Kresge, Sam, urgent POA deed shoved at me tonight. Need your eyes and your presence. 7 a.m. tomorrow at my place. I'll have coffee. Bring your calm. The screen glowed in my hand as the messages went out. Within a minute, Heidi's 3 dots pulsed. Then her answer, yes, we'll be there. No questions. Fritz took a little longer. He always did, not because he was slow, but because he read twice before he sent a message once. I'll be there. Do not sign a thing. Bring nothing to them. Let them bring it to you, he wrote. My mouth tightened into what might have been a smile on a younger man. I put the phone next to the folder and opened the front flap. Power of attorney. Transfer on death. A third paper I hadn't noticed at the table slid forward, a third-party form for my insurance company, giving them full access to my policy information and the power to change it. Greta had even thought of the things you never think about until a storm knocks them down. Good. The better the trap they built, the cleaner it would look when it snapped back on them. Pacing matters when you're up against people who want to rush you. So I slowed the whole room down. I made a fresh pot of coffee I wouldn't finish. I rinsed the same mug twice. I moved through the house and did what I always do when I need to steady myself. I listened to how the old wood was holding up. No complaints. This house still liked me in it. I grabbed the old metal lockbox from the office closet, set it on the table, and turned the key. Inside was the list I'd started the day I saw Greta at the bank with Hans. Entries in black ink going back over a year. I read the list of all the help I'd given my son. $150 for a car repair, $425 for gym stuff, $1,000 for a tuition gap, $800 for quarterly taxes, and another $125 for home insurance. On and on, 110 items with dates and notes. Each one felt justified at the time, but looking at it now, it was a pattern. A pattern looks like love when you're in it. From a distance, with a yellow lamp and a legal pad, it looks like training. I laid the ledger open to the last page, slid a copy of last year's property tax bills next to it, and put the deed to the house on top. The paper smelled faintly of that old, chalky smell only county records have. Proof of a pattern, check. I added a small audio recorder to the pile, cheap and easy to hide. It was a thing I used to use for notes when I was consulting, and my hands were too dirty for a pen. I didn't need a secret recording to win. I needed it to remember. People tell the truth differently when they think time is on their side. I wrote another line on the pad, seat them across from the light. Me with my back to the window. Witnesses near the door. The layout mattered. If Hans tried to put me where the pen would find my hand just out of habit, I wanted the room to make that habit think twice. I pulled Ingrid's picture off the safe and turned the dial, our wedding date, 4/8/14. The metal door slid open. Inside were the originals of everything that makes a life real: birth certificates, marriage license, discharge papers from an old knee surgery, and the will I'd written a few months after she passed, 'cause I couldn't stand how unknown tomorrow had suddenly become. I laid the will next to the deed, my eyes on the part that left Hans the house if I went first, with a simple note about Elsa's education. I touched the page where Ingrid's name was and said out loud, because this house has heard all the important things I've ever said, I kept my promise. I just didn't see how fast he'd sell his. The old anger, the kind that wants to be hot, pressed against my ribs. I let it come and let it go. Rage is a good speaker at midnight, but in the morning, it forgets its lines. I needed lines I could keep. I turned off the kitchen light and stood in the hall where we hang our years. Hans in a baseball uniform big as a flag. Ingrid in a red raincoat, Logan, into the rain. Elsa with paint on her nose, holding up a sloppy heron like she'd found a new kind of bird. A heron doesn't mind standing still, she'd written. It was a note I took as permission tonight. My phone buzzed. Heidi again. Niece can notarize right away at 7. She'll bring her book. Do you need anything else? I typed, a steady presence, and left it at that. Then I called the number I'd written on the pad last winter but never thought I'd use, the direct line of a branch VP I'd done some free design work for years ago. Klaus Fischer, I said when he answered. I need you tomorrow, not as a banker, but as a man who gets what these words mean. He listened as I read only the headers and nothing more: POA, TOD deed, insurer authorization. Then he said the one thing I needed most: don't get clever tonight. Get thorough. If it's real, it'll still be real with witnesses. If it isn't, witnesses will teach it to behave. I thanked him and hung up. My watch said 10:15. The recorder sat on the table, small and patient. The house clock ticked like a metronome you could rest your heartbeat on. The folder had one more stapled paper inside that I hadn't seen at the table yet: Care Transition Plan Draft. Greta wasn't just looking to handle my bills. She wanted a story on paper that could be attached to any court petition they might file. Noted increased confusion, it said, observed difficulty operating vehicle at night, repeated misplacement of items, keys, phone. I read the lies they planned to tell and felt that familiar seesaw of sadness and clear-headedness tilt toward the latter. Pictures came to mind. Greta putting a brochure for an old folks' home under my sugar bowl. I got an envelope shoved through my mail slot with no stamp on it, just my name written in Hans's quick, messy handwriting. Inside was one sheet of paper. We've got Dr. Kelman scheduled to visit tomorrow at 1 o'clock for an evaluation. Please be home. No signature, no explanation. Just their next play. I read it once, then put it down next to my coffee cup. They wanted a competency test on their terms, with their doctor. Fine. I had been expecting that. I dialed Fritz. Change of plans, I told him. Can you be here tomorrow at 12:30 and bring someone who can do a real capacity assessment? Someone they can't say is biased. He chuckled. I already have the name. I'll give her a call today. The rain eased up that afternoon, and I walked the perimeter of the house again. The back gate latch was a little loose, so I fixed it. The front steps needed to be swept, so I did that, too. Not because it had anything to do with the plan, but because it mattered to me. This was still my home, and I was going to keep it that way. By the evening, I could feel the shape of what was comin'. They'd show up with their doctor, expecting to steer the conversation toward confusion and weakness. They'd find a room set up for the truth, witnesses in place, and a man who had already decided how it was gonna end. The game was still on, but now it was on my board. The morning they chose to test my mind came in colder than it should have for early October. The kind of cold that makes the air taste like metal when you step outside. If someone invites a storm to your front door, you're the one who gets to decide where the lightning hits. I stood at the kitchen counter, watching the steam rise from my coffee, not 'cause I needed the warmth, but 'cause the mug felt steady in my hands. Steadiness was the thing they were comin' to question today. At 7 o'clock, Fritz called. Klaus, I've confirmed Dr. Harrington for this afternoon. She's board-certified in geriatric medicine, she's written books about these capacity evaluations, and she's allergic to taquine shortcuts. She'll be there at 12:30. Good, I said. They're expectin' Dr. Kelman. Fritz let a little smile creep into his voice. Then they're gonna be pleasantly disappointed. The pacing had to be on purpose today. No rushin', no last-minute changes that would look like I was scramblin'. Every move needed to feel like it was meant to happen, like I'd been ready for this the whole time. I set the oak table just like before, my chair with the light at my back, 2 empty chairs across from me, and the witnesses by the door. The folder of documents sat closed right in the middle, not to be touched until I said so. At 9 o'clock, I walked the whole property one more time. The pine smelled sharper in the cold, and the gravel path under my boots sounded louder than usual. I checked the mailbox, knowin' nothin' important would be there, but the small act of openin' and closin' it made me think of all the years Ingrid had done the same thing. This house wasn't just mine. It was the story of a life built in straight lines, and I wasn't about to let anyone redraw it without my hand on the pencil. My phone lit up with Greta's name. This time, I answered. Klaus, she said, her voice bright in a way that meant it wasn't real. Just wanted to make sure you remembered Dr. Kelman is comin' at 1. I remember you arranged that, I said. And I've arranged something else. Silence. What does that mean? It means the evaluation will be thorough, documented, and witnessed for everyone's protection. Her tone got sharp. You don't trust us. I trust the process, I said, and hung up. I could almost feel her holdin' the phone to her ear afterward, tryin' to figure out if she'd made a mistake. At 12:15, Heidi's car pulled up. She came inside with her steady presence, settin' her thermos down on the sideboard. Jenna followed, journal in hand, her face as hard to read as a locked door. Are we ready? Heidi asked. Ready, I said. At 12:20, Fritz arrived, his coat collar turned up against the wind. He looked around the room and nodded once. "Layout's perfect," he said. "Let M bring the weather. They'll find the grounds already dry." The moment started with the sound of tires on gravel at 12:58. 2 car doors slammed, then voices. Greta's heels hit the porch first, with Hans right behind her, and between them was a man I figured was Dr. Kelman. He was tall, in his 50s, with a leather briefcase and a look that said he'd already made up his mind. But before they could get to the door, a silver sedan rolled up behind them. Fritz stepped out, followed by a woman in a dark coat with a doctor's bag. Her posture was neat and straight, like someone who didn't mind being judged. "This is Dr. Harrington," Fritz said as they got to the door. Hans's smile disappeared. "We already have a doctor." "So do I replied, "and since it's my ability being evaluated, both will be here. That way, there's no argument." Kelman's eyes got small, but he stepped inside without saying a word. Harrington followed, putting her bag neatly by the chair next to mine. Greta's voice was sugar over steel. "Klaus, this feels unnecessary." "Then it shouldn't be a problem," I said, pointing to the chairs. "Let's begin." Kelman started with his questions fast: my name, the date, what was in the news. The kind of easy stuff you'd expect. I answered each one with the calm of a man numbing the tools in his toolbox. Then Harrington took her turn, going deeper: financial decisions I'd made in the last year, why I made fake situations about property and consent. Each answer had details, names, dates, and money amounts pulled straight from the ledger in my head. Hans shifted in his seat. Greta crossed her legs the other way. After about a half hour, Harrington closed her notebook. "Mr. Fisher, in my professional opinion, you are fully capable of handling your business. I don't see any mental issues that would justify transferring control." Kelman cleared his throat. "I'd like to wait before I make my judgment." "Of course," Harrington said. "But we'll be filling a joint report, and mine will include the presence of witnesses and notarized papers of what happened today." That was the lightning strike. It hit right where it was supposed to, and they both felt it. Hans opened his mouth, then closed it. Greta's smile was gone. The pacing moved toward the finish line. I slid the folder toward them. "You can take your papers back. I won't be signing anything today or any other day unless it's on my terms and my time, with my lawyer present." Hans's jaw got tight. "We were just trying to help you," he said. "Help looks different when it comes with a pen in your hand and a clock on the table," I replied. "And if you're worried about Elsa, I've made plans for her that don't require you to be in control." That landed. I could see it in Greta's eyes, figuring out the numbers, realizing the window was closing. Fritz stood up and buttoned his coat. "This ends our business for today. Any more talks will go through my office." As they left, Harrington gave me a small nod, the kind professionals give when they've seen a fight without having to throw a punch. The door shut behind them, and the house let out a breath. I sat back down at the oak table, running my hand over the wood grain. Today wasn't the end, but it was the moment the ground stopped shaking under my feet. And in this kind of game, that's the first step to winning. They left my driveway in 2 cars, one right after the other, but the gravel dust hung in the air like it didn't want to follow them. I stayed sitting at the oak table long enough to hear the kettle click off in the kitchen. No rush. In war, whether you fight it with ink or with iron, what you do in the moments after the battle matters just as much as the battle itself. I poured the tea and let it get cool. The house had gone quiet, but not the kind of quiet you can trust. This was the quiet after an animal has disappeared into the bushes. You can't see it anymore, but you know it's still there, circling. By 4:30, Fritz had gone, Harrington had gone, and even Heidi had gone back to her place across the yard. I walked her to the gate. "They'll try again," she said. "Yep," I replied, "but next time they'll be rushing, and when people rush, they leave fingerprints. She gave me that slow nod she saves for hard truths, then turned for home. Inside, I gathered the papers Kelman had brought and slid them into a plain manila envelope. It wasn't evidence in a courtroom yet, but it was a record. And records have a way of living longer than lies. I put the envelope in the drawer where Ingrid used to keep birthday cards, a place Hans and Greta would never think to look because it had no money value. That was the first part of my counterattack, make them underestimate where the real value was. At 6, the phone rang. Not the house line, my cell. Elsa's name lit up the screen. "Grandpa, they're mad," she whispered before I could even say hello. Mom slammed the cupboard door, and Dad told her to keep her voice down, but I heard him say something about find in another angle. My hand tightened around the phone. "You did the right thing calling me. Are you all right?" "Yeah, but Grandpa." Her voice got a little small. "Are they gonna take the house anyway?" I took a slow breath. "Not if I can help it, Elsa. And I can help it." I hung up and just sat there, letting her words hang in the air. Another angle could mean anything, but I'd been around long enough to know it usually meant something you hadn't thought of yet, or worse, something you had but hoped they wouldn't try. That night, I didn't sleep. I walked the halls, touching the picture frames on the walls. Hans at 9 in his Little League cap. Ingrid holding a kite at the coast. Elsa painting at the kitchen table. Every photo was a record of time that couldn't be taken away. But the house they hung in, that was different. The next morning, I called Fritz. "They're getting back together," I said. "Good," he answered. "Means they're off balance." He suggested we meet in town. Over black coffee at Miller's Diner, we laid it all out. I'd need to strengthen the property lines, both legally and physically, before they made their next move. "Boundary survey," Fritz said. "Get it filed. If they try to claim any confusion about what's yours, the county records will shut that down before it starts." By noon, I was at the surveyor's office. A man named Rolf shook my hand and said he could have the work done by Friday. "Expectin' trouble?" he asked. "Just making sure the foundation's level," I replied. He chuckled, but I wasn't joking. I was locking the side door when headlights swept across the wall. It wasn't Hans's truck, too low. It was Greta's SUV. She didn't knock. She came around back, her heels clacking on the stone path. "Klaus," she said, her voice as sweet as a spoonful of syrup, hiding the taste of medicine. "Hans and I should talk without all the extras. No lawyers, no witnesses." I leaned against the door frame. "If you think that will make me more agreeable, you've misread me." She stepped closer. "You've put yourself in a corner. We could have handled this quietly, but now." She stopped herself, looking toward the fence where the neighbor's light had just flicked on. "What now?" I asked. She stood up straight. "Now you can either sign a voluntary transfer of interest or watch Hans go through probate while you're still alive." My jaw tightened. "You've been doing your homework, but so have I." I opened the door just enough for her to see the manila envelope sitting on the counter. "Every word, every signature you've tried to push on me is logged, and if I ever have to, that goes to the sheriff before the sun goes down." Her eyes got small. "You wouldn't." I smiled a little. "You don't know me as well as you think." She left without another word, but her heels hit the stones harder than before. That's the sound of someone walking away with less than they came for. Over the next 2 days, I moved quietly. I called an old friend in insurance to check my homeowner's policy and made sure all my contact information bypassed Hans entirely. I updated my will to make Elsa's trust completely untouchable, with Heidi as a co-trustee. And then, because a good counterattack comes from a direction no one's looking, I paid a visit to the county treasurer's office. There's a little-known thing called a life estate with retained powers. It meant I could still live in the house, still control it, but the remainder man, the person I chose to get it after me, would be locked in. I chose Elsa. When I walked out of that office with the papers stamped and sealed, the October wind cut across my face, sharper than I expected. It didn't matter. The foundation was set. Now, if Hans and Greta wanted to move me, they'd be dragging chains they didn't even know I had wrapped around the place. That Friday, the surveyor's report came in. Rolf met me at the property line with the papers. No disputes. Boundaries are clean. You're rock solid here. I shook his hand and thought, not for the first time, how much of survival is just getting the right people on your side before you need them. Saturday morning, Elsa came over again. She held a new drawing, this one of a little tree with a single leaf. "Grandpa," she said, "look. It's still strong." Okay, I'll continue the story in the same style, keeping the names and details consistent with the previous sections. Here is the final part of the story, as requested. So, until this stuff is all sorted out, we think you shouldn't see her, Hans added real fast. It's not forever, but if you keep fighting us, it might have to be permanent. I just let the silence sit there. Inside my head, I saw a picture of Elsa from just last month, with her sleeves pushed up, dabbing green paint onto a heron's wing. Her little voice explaining how the heron doesn't mind standing still. The way she looked up at me then, like I was the only one who'd get what she meant. Now they were using that same kid as a poker chip. Part of me wanted to give in, sign whatever they wanted if it meant I'd see her this weekend, hear her talk about colors and brushes. But another part of me, the one that was forged in harder times, knew that giving up now would just teach them that this kind of thing works. Next time, they'd push even harder. "You're saying," I said, my voice steady, "that if I don't sign away my home and my rights, I won't see my granddaughter?" Hans didn't flinch. "We're saying Elsa's well-being comes first." "Then why," I asked, "does this sound like ransom instead of care?" Greta leaned in a little. "You can be part of what's best for her, Klaus, if you just trust us to handle things." Fritz's fingers tapped once on the table, a sound only I seemed to notice. It was our signal to stay steady. I thought about the last time Elsa was here. The paint on her hands. The way she'd laughed when the wind almost carried her sketchbook away. Her eyes, clear and honest, looked at me like I was still the person who could make her world safe. If I backed down now, I'd get her for a weekend, maybe two. But in the long run, I'd be giving up the very ground she stood on. "You know," I said, "Elsa told me she wanted to bring her art project over. A heron, I think." Greta's smile got thin. "She can still show you. Just not until this is settled." The fridge hummed in the background. Jenna shifted her pen. "That," I said, "isn't love. That's leverage." Hans's jaw got tight. "Call it what you want." I stood up slow, so the chair's legs scraped softly on the oak floor. "I want you to say it again," I told him. "The part where I won't see Elsa if I don't sign." He hesitated. Greta cut in. "You heard us." "I did," I said, nodding toward Jenna. "And so did our witness, who will write it all down before the day is over." Greta's eyes flickered for just a second, but it was enough to tell me the play had worked. "Dad," Hans said, "don't make this harder than it has to be." "I'm not making it harder," I replied. "I'm making it clear." I reached for the folder on the fireplace mantel and put it in the middle of the table. "You can take this," I said. "But I'm not signing it. Not today. Not ever. Not when my granddaughter is part of the bargainin'." Hans's voice got hard. "Then you're the one keeping her from you. If that helps you sleep," I said, "then you hold on to it." The room felt heavy, the kind of air that comes before a storm. Heidi's knuckles were white around her thermos. Fritz's eyes stayed locked on Hans. Greta finally sat down, arms crossed, her voice cold. We'll take other steps. You can't block us forever. Forever isn't the point, I said. Today is. And today you told me everything I need to know about how far you'll go. Jenna opened her journal and started writing. Hans grabbed the folder without opening it, slid it under his arm like he'd just stolen something. At the door, he turned. You brought this on yourself. No, I said. You brought Elsa into it. The door shut. The engine started. I stayed standing until their cars were gone. Heidi let out a breath. That was ugly. It was honest, I said. Fritz leaned back. They're not done. That was a warning shot. Next time will be official. Let them, I replied. They've played their strongest card. Now I'll play mine. I picked up my yellow pad and wrote 3 words in big letters: guardianship, custody, contempt. The heron, I thought, doesn't mind standing still, especially when the tide is about to turn. They didn't wait long to make good on their promise. 3 days after they'd sat in my kitchen and used Elsa as a bargain in a chip, I drove into town with a bag of her favorite oatmeal cookies. The plan was simple: drop them off. Maybe catch her at the door if she was home. When I pulled into their driveway, the curtains in the front window shifted. Then nothing. I knocked, waited, knocked again. No answer. The bag felt heavier in my hand than it should have. I left it on the porch and drove away. The next day, I called Hans. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't bother leaving a message. I'd learned by now that those never got answered. 2 more calls over the next week ended the same way. Greta didn't pick up either. By the second week, I decided to catch Elsa at school. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I needed to see for myself that she was okay. I parked across the street from the playground just before the end of the day. Kids came out in groups, their backpacks swinging, their voices carrying. I spotted her hair in a messy braid, her pink jacket zipped up to her chin. She was Logan with another girl, her eyes bright with the same light I'd always known. I got out of my truck and raised a hand. She saw me. For a second, her face lit up even more. Then Greta's SUV pulled up, blocking my view. Greta leaned across the passenger seat. The door swung open, and Elsa climbed in without a wave. The SUV drove away before I could take another step. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with the heron drawing she'd made last month. I traced the lines of the wings with my finger, wondering if she even knew why I'd disappeared from her weekends, wondering what Greta had told her. The ache in my chest was something I hadn't felt since Ingrid passed, a hollow, steady pain that was worse because it was on purpose, on me. Week 3. I tried one last time without warning. Saturday morning, I drove over with a small wooden box I'd made for her art stuff. Hans answered the door, his body filling the frame. Now is not a good time, he said. When is? I asked. He shrugged. We'll let you know. You said this was temporary, I reminded him. It still is, but pushin' isn't helpin', he said. His tone had that careful edge people use when they think they're holding all the cards. I took a slow breath. Tell her I stopped by. He didn't answer, just closed the door. I stood there for a few seconds, listening to the latch click into place. By the time I got home, I knew exactly what was happening. They were waiting for me to break, to call Greta back and say, "Fine, I'll sign whatever you want. Just let me see her." They thought the lack of contact would wear me down. But all it did was sharpen something I'd kept put away until now. That Monday morning, I called Fritz. "They've cut me off," I told him. "No visits, no calls, no nothing. It's been almost a month." His voice was calm but direct. Then we go to court. The words landed heavy. You think it'll work in this state? Grandparents have standing if they can prove a real relationship and that it's harmful for the kid to be cut off. You've got both. You've been a consistent caregiver. You've got witnesses, Heidi, Fritz, even your neighbor who's seen Elsa over there every week. I don't want to drag her through this, I said. You're not dragging her, he said. You're protecting her connection to you. That matters in the court's eyes. And frankly, if we don't move now, they'll say you've been gone on your own. We met at his office that afternoon. The air was cool inside, the blinds halfway closed. He'd already pulled the forms, the petition for grandparent visits and a request for a temporary order. We're asking for a temporary order first, he explained, sliding the papers toward me. That gets you back in touch while we get ready for the full hearing. Judges don't like the idea of a kid losing a good relationship while the case is going on. I read the papers slowly. The legal language was thick but clear enough. Every paper had my name on it, and across from it, on the other side of the V, was Hans's name and Greta's. My own son's name in black ink on the other side of a court case. That's the kind of thing you never expect to see in your life. Fritz laid out the steps. We'll file with the county court. They'll send a notice to Hans and Greta. The first hearing will be for the temporary order, probably in a week or two. After that, we build the case for permanent visits. What about them saying I'm crazy or unfit? I asked. Then we prove I'm wrong. Clean record, steady income, documented involvement in Elsa's life. We've got photos, text messages, people who will speak for you. You've done nothing wrong, Klaus. I signed where he pointed. My pen scratching against the thick paper. Each signature felt like crossing a bridge you can't walk back over. When I left the office, the March wind was sharp enough to sting. I drove home with the radio off, my mind going over every moment with Elsa, painting on the porch, reading on the couch, fishing at the lake. If Hans and Greta wanted to wipe all that away, they'd have to do it in front of a judge. That night, I got out the yellow pad and started a list. Every date Elsa had been at my house in the last year, every holiday we'd spent together, every school event I'd been to. By midnight, the list was 3 pages long. Proof, not just for the court, but for myself, that what we had was real and worth fighting for. The next morning, I called Heidi, told her what I was doing. She didn't hesitate. You need me to speak for you, I'll be there. Fritz said the same thing. Even Jenna, who'd seen that last meeting in the kitchen, agreed to put her notes into a sworn statement. The next week, the court clerk called with a date, temporary order hearing, April 14th, 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks until I could look Hans and Greta in the eye in a courtroom and say, this is not yours to take. I stood at the fence that afternoon, looking toward the horizon. The heron doesn't mind standing still, I thought again. But stillness isn't the same as giving up. And this fight was just getting started. The courthouse smelled a little like varnish and old paper, the kind of smell that gets into the wood and never leaves. I'd been here before for property stuff and land disputes, but never like this. Today, it wasn't about a line on a map. It was about a living, breathing part of my life. A little girl with paint under her nails and a laugh you could pick out of a crowd. Fritz met me at the top of the courthouse steps. He was wearing his usual dark suit, his briefcase held tight under one arm. They're already inside, he said. They? I asked, though I didn't need to. Hans, Greta, their lawyer. I nodded. The words from that last kitchen talk were still sharp in my memory. That's not love. That's leverage. We went through security. The metal detector beeped at the change in my pocket. I put the coins into the plastic tray, watching them rattle to a stop. Every small noise felt louder this morning. Inside the courtroom, the benches were half full. Heidi and Fritz were there, sitting together in the second row. Fritz gave me a short nod. I spotted Jenna, too, her notary journal balanced on her lap, even though she wouldn't be recording anything today. Hans sat at the table with the other side, in a gray suit that looked like it had been worn to weddings and funerals. Greta was next to him, her back straight, her hair in a tight bun. Her eyes slid over me once, hard to read, then back to the front. The judge came in, a woman with silver hair pulled neatly into a bun. She took her seat, adjusted her glasses, and called the case. Petition for grandparent visitation. Klaus Fischer versus Hans Fischer and Greta Fischer. Hearing my last name on both sides of the V felt like a strange kind of break. Fritz stood up. Your Honor, my client has been a constant and good presence in his granddaughter's life since she was born. He has been a caregiver, provided for her needs, and had a close relationship with her until the other side suddenly and without reason cut off all contact. We are asking for a temporary visitation order to keep that relationship going, while the court thinks about the full request. Their lawyer stood up. Your Honor, my clients did what they thought was best for their daughter. The home environment at Mr. Fisher's place has become tense because of ongoing property arguments between the parties. They believe limited contact is needed until those issues are solved. The judge looked at Hans. Mr. Fisher, is that correct? Yes, Your Honor, Hans said. His voice was steady, like he'd practiced it. We just want a calm place for Elsa. This whole situation has made things tense. Fritz leaned toward me and whispered, they're trying to make it sound like it was both of you. When it was my turn to speak, Fritz asked me direct questions. Mr. Fisher, can you describe your involvement in Elsa's life before contact was cut off? I told the judge about Saturday mornings making pancakes together, about walking her to the bus stop when Hans was working early shifts, and about the afternoons she spent in my workshop building birdhouses. I didn't make it sound better than it was. I didn't have to. And when was the last time you saw her? Fritz asked. Over a month ago, I said. They told me I wouldn't see her until I signed over my house and gave them power of attorney. A small stir went through the room. Greta's lawyer objected, but the judge held up a hand. I'll allow it. Keep going. Fritz turned to Jenna in the crowd. Ms. Foster, could you please tell the court what you saw on February 17th? Jenna stood up, her voice clear. I was at Mr. Fisher's home as a neutral witness. I heard Mrs. Fisher say that unless Mr. Fisher signed the property papers, he would not see his granddaughter. I wrote it down in my journal right away. The judge asked to see the entry. Jenna handed it to the bailiff, who brought it up. The judge read silently for a moment, then looked at Hans and Greta. Did you make such a statement? Greta shifted in her seat. It was taken out of context. Answer the question, the judge said. Yes, Greta admitted, finally. That's enough, the judge said. Fritz put his hands on the table. Your Honor, this is not about a calm environment. It's about using a child as leverage in a fight that has nothing to do with her. That is exactly what the law tries to stop. Their lawyer tried to switch gears, talking about emotional stress and family freedom, but the judge's face didn't change. She made a few notes, then looked at both sides. I'm granting the request for a temporary visit, she said. Effective right away, Mr. Fisher will have visits with Elsa every other weekend starting this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. at his home. The handoff will happen at the police station parking lot, to keep things neutral. I am also ordering both sides to not say bad things about each other in the child's presence. The gavel came down once. The sound was louder than I expected. Hans's jaw was tight, but he didn't look at me. Greta whispered something to him as they gathered their things. Fritz packed up his files. This is a win, he said quietly. Temporary orders often set the tone for the final ones. I nodded, but my focus was already on the Saturday ahead. When the court ended, Heidi squeezed my arm. "You did the right thing." "I hope she thinks so," I said. Saturday came, cold and clear. I got to the police station early, the yellow line in the lot bright under the morning sun. At exactly 10, Greta's SUV pulled in. Elsa stepped out, her backpack slung over one shoulder. She saw me and started running before Greta could say anything. I knelt down, and she wrapped her arms around my neck. "Grandpa," she said, her voice muffled in my coat. "I made a new heron. It's better than the last one." I pulled back just enough to see her face. The same brightness as always. "Can't wait to see it," I told her. Over her shoulder, Greta was already getting back into the SUV. For the first time in weeks, I didn't care what kind of look she had on her face. Elsa was here, and for now, that was enough. Back at the house, she unpacked her paints at the kitchen table. The afternoon light caught in her hair, and the hum of the fridge was the only other sound. Watching her dip the brush, I realized something: standing still, like the heron, isn't about waiting for the tide to turn on its own. It's about knowing when to attack. And this was only the first attack. I watched Hans's tail lights disappear into the fog outside the courthouse, swallowed by a gray that felt like the earth itself wanted to close this chapter. Greta followed behind, her head down, her phone pressed to her ear, her words fast and sharp. There was no sugar left in her voice, only the dry scrape of someone who'd lost control. I didn't have to hear the conversation to know they were already trying to save something, anything. People like them never stop scheming. But it didn't matter. The judge's order was stamped, signed, and put into the record. I would see Elsa every week, by myself, starting now. Fritz walked beside me down the courthouse steps, his voice low and on purpose. "You didn't just win today, Klaus. You took their strongest weapon and broke it in half." I nodded. The words were steady, but inside, the weight I'd been carrying didn't drop all at once. It loosened in slow turns, like a rope unwinding. Across the street, Heidi was standing with Elsa, who had been waiting the whole time. Her little body was tense, her eyes looking at every face until she saw me. Her whole body seemed to light up from the inside. And then she was moving faster than I had ever seen her run. Her sneakers slapped the wet ground, her hair flying out behind her like a flag until she crashed into me with a force that made my knees lock. Her arms locked around my waist, her face pressed so tight into my jacket I could feel her breath against my chest. "You came back," she whispered, like those 3 words were the dam holding back weeks of fear. I wrapped my arms around her, breathing in the faint smell of paint still on her sleeves. "I never left you, Elsa." "Not here," I said, pressing a hand gently over my heart. She pulled back just enough to meet my eyes. Her eyelashes were wet, but her look was fierce. "They said maybe you didn't want to see me anymore." The sentence cut through me like cold steel. I cupped her face in both hands. "That will never be true. Not for a second. Don't let anyone tell you different." She nodded, but her fingers didn't let go of my coat. Over her shoulder, I saw Hans standing by his truck, his arms crossed, his jaw hard enough to crack teeth. Greta was next to him, her lips pressed into a thin, bloodless line. They didn't come closer. They didn't speak, and for the first time, there was no more spin to throw, no last-minute deal, just silence, and the space between us would only get bigger from here. On the drive home, Elsa's voice filled the car like sunlight creeping into a dark room. She talked about her art project, about how she decided the heron's wings needed streaks of brighter blue because birds should look like the sky they fly in. Not once did she mention Hans or Greta. I didn't either. The court order might have given me weekends, but the real victory was right here beside me. Her legs swinging, her hands painting the air as she spoke. That evening we walked down to the marsh together, the heron painting framed in oak under her arm. She set it against the old wood piling with care. "It's finished now," she said softly. "See, the wings are ready." I looked at each brushstroke, on purpose. Each color was chosen with a reason. "It's beautiful," I told her, "just like the artist." Her smile was honest, free of the shadows I'd seen in the last few months. And for a moment, the air felt lighter. When she went to bed, I stood in the doorway of the guest room for a long time, listening to the steady rise and fall of her breathing. That sound was peace, the kind I'd been chasing without even knowing it. Downstairs, the manila envelope sat on the fireplace mantel, heavier now with official copies of the order, the life estate deed, and my will, naming Elsa as the one to get it all when the time came. The locks on the gates, both the kind you can see and the kind only I know are there, were in place. I thought about Hans and Greta then, not with anger, but with a clear head. Tonight, they'd go back to their own home, sit in separate rooms, speak in clipped sentences, maybe argue about what went wrong. And somewhere in the quiet between them, they'd feel it. They hadn't just lost a legal fight. They'd lost their hold over me and over her. That's something no court can give back. Upstairs, Elsa stirred in her sleep but didn't wake. I turned off the light, letting the dark settle like a calm hand over the house. Outside, the tide shifted with the wind, steady, patient, and sure to happen. The heron doesn't mind standing still because it knows the stillness is part of the hunt. And I've learned the same thing. Stillness isn't given up. It's the quiet strength to protect what matters until the moment comes to move. One day when Hans and Greta look back, they'll see me exactly where they tried to push me out, free, steady, and garden, the only thing worth fighting for. Because in the end, the measure of a life isn't what you win, but what you refuse to lose. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you liked this story, please give this video a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments. To hear the next story, click on the playlist showing now.